Go ahead, Vince.
Thank you, Mayor. So before you this evening is the third and final resolution regarding the New York State Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative Plan. The resolution is similar to the one discussed at last week's special city council meeting with certain changes, including the removal of the words "for consideration" in the second to last whereas paragraph and in the therefore paragraph, adding references to collective bargaining agreements and contractual obligations in section 5, and indicating that the independent advisory committee will be appointed by the mayor to provide advice and input on the implementation of the accepted recommendations and to also review the issues identified for a civilian review board. The resolution, now up for a discussion and vote, is in conformance with Governor Cuomo's Executive Order 203. I know that there has been some discussion and I think some confusion as to what the executive order requires and what it does not. It should be emphasized at the outset that the clear intent of the order was for local governments to engage community members and stakeholders in an overall effort to improve the policies and practices of the police department and to establish a plan that provides for such improvement, and we have done that. The order very clearly places the burden and responsibility upon the local government to develop this plan and to adopt it by local law or resolution after offering it for public comment to all citizens in the city and after consideration of such comments. The task force established by the mayor and the city council was part of the process, and they worked diligently to establish a list of 50 recommendations for the city council to consider. To suggest, though, as some have, that the recommendations are actually not recommendations at all, but are instead somehow demands that must be followed, is to misread and misinterpret the executive order and to misconstrue the very intent of that order. To be clear, the council is not under any type of directive or mandate to accept every single recommendation provided by the task force, and I have personally confirmed this fact with the Deputy Secretary of Public Safety under Governor Cuomo's administration. Of the 50—
Spoken like a pure racist.
Yep, thank you. Sorry, Vince. I'm going to take everybody off the call if we get another interruption. So let's continue on, Vince. Thank you.
Of the 50 recommendations, there are only 2 which have been identified as items that the city council simply does not have the authority to implement. And they include the recommendation to divert seized assets and the recommendation to somehow ban county, state, and federal law enforcement from entering the city if they happen to participate in the DoD 1033 program. Does anyone really believe that we would not be in compliance with Executive Order 203 if we do not accept recommendations which we have no legal ability to accept? Of the 50 recommendations, there were also only 2 which were identified as simply requiring further review. And they include the recommendation to ban no-knock warrants and to implement a civilian review board. These recommendations have not been rejected, but instead called out for further evaluation. At previous city council meetings, I have discussed the need—
Further evaluation by you white motherfuckers?
Okay.
Huh? Like you're not black. You're not black. Black lives.
Okay, Lisa, can we take most of these people off, please? Thank you. I'm sorry, give us a minute. We're going to clear that.
Yes, silence the people who care racist policies. Don't do what.
Don't be racist. Don't be racist.
You can't silence us. You can't silence us. Do what's right. Do what's morally right.
Shall I proceed, Mayor?
Wait a second, Vince, please.
You cowards. You guys are cowards.
Okay, Lee, just breathe. Okay. Go ahead, Vince, please continue.
At previous city council meetings, I have discussed the need to evaluate a civilian review board to ensure compliance with our city charter and to determine whether an amendment to the charter would be required. I have also indicated that we will need to identify any components which may run afoul of existing collective bargaining agreements in New York civil service law. The components of the civilian review board will need to be determined by the city council, including the purpose, scope, and function of such a board. It is only once these components are fully established that we will know the extent to which the charter, union contracts, and state law will be affected. There are issues with the civilian review board proposed by the task force that the city council will ultimately have to address and evaluate before moving forward, including due consideration of any possible alternatives where appropriate. For example, the task force has proposed that only a resident of the city can file a complaint with the civilian review board. Why? As we all know, there are times during the year when we have more non-residents in the city than residents. Why not allow them the ability to file a complaint? What about the department itself or other departments? If the chief or the commissioner has an issue with an officer and wishes to pursue discipline, should they not utilize a civilian review board prior to imposing such discipline? If not, why not? Is the conduct of some officers really going to be reviewed by an independent board while others are reviewed by the department? What about the ability of the civilian review board to investigate police conduct even in the absence of a complaint? The city council has an obligation to consider these and other alternatives to a civilian review board. What about complaints that involve or relate to an ongoing criminal investigation, a prosecution, or a civil lawsuit? How does the civilian review board operate in a manner which does not interfere in those matters? The proposal submitted by the task force makes reference to parallel legal proceedings and indicates that it will be cognizant of such proceedings, but is completely silent on how they will actually conduct their fact-finding during those situations. Will they be allowed to subpoena a witness who is already involved in a criminal investigation, a prosecution, or an ongoing lawsuit? These matters need to be addressed and resolved. The task force has also proposed that the civilian review board will only accept complaints that have been reduced to writing and apparently only on the form referenced in their proposal. Why? What about complaints that are not reduced to writing? There are, in fact, occasions where the department receives verbal complaints. Should the department investigate those internally while the civilian review board investigates those that have been reduced to writing? What about anonymous complaints? The task force has proposed that the civilian review board receive and process grievances regarding the conduct of employees of the police department. What type of grievances are they referring to? Do they mean that any and all conduct will be subject to civilian review? And if so, why? Should the civilian review board be responsible at taxpayer expense for investigating relatively minor infractions or deviations from city policies when we already have HR? Why should other employees of the city go through human resources while members of the police department go through a civilian review board for the very same conduct? Other municipalities that have implemented a civilian review board have limited their review to use of force or similar type complaints, recognizing that the police are unlike other municipal employees in that they have the authority to use and exert force. Is this type of limitation appropriate? Has it been considered? Regarding the board itself, the task force has proposed that it be made up of 5 members, with only 1 required to have adjudicatory experience. How is that defined? What if the only individual with adjudicatory experience is required to recuse? Then there is no one to assist the board in seeing that matter through to completion. The proposed civilian review board also calls for the members to engage in mediation. But how are we ensuring that the members are in fact qualified to mediate? What training are we requiring?
Vince, can you hold up a second? Commissioner Dalton, you're muted. I got it.
I have a little disturbance outside my office. Can you give me one quick second to see what's going on so I can secure the office and continue?
Okay, all right, let us know. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry. One of our officers is addressing it. We're all set. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Thank you. Continue, Vince. Thank you.
The task force proposal also provides that if there is a recusal, then the chair must also refrain from voting so as to maintain an uneven number of voting members. Why would there need to be a reduction in voting members? Normally, and as it is with the city council, if there is a 5-member board, 3 votes are required to pass a matter. If 1 member recuses, 3 votes are still required. Even if 2 members recuse, 3 votes are required. But under the task force proposal, there could be a scenario where the conduct of an officer could result in a recommendation for discipline based on 3 affirmative votes, while the very same conduct of another officer could result in a recommendation based only on 2 affirmative votes. Does that make sense? Is that fair? Why not consider having alternates serve on the board to address possible recusals? The task force provides for an administrative due process hearing, but it is unclear exactly what this means and whether this hearing is somehow meant to replace or supplement the hearing required by Section 75 of the Civil Service Law before certain discipline can be imposed. If it is meant to supplement, then the question is why. In other words, why would there be a need for a civilian review board to conduct an administrative due process hearing where they would recommend discipline or removal, only to then require an entirely separate due process hearing in order to actually accept their recommendation? Is that necessary? On the other hand, the task force proposal, if the task force proposal is somehow intended to replace the hearing required under Section 75, then it clearly fails to provide for the due process required under that section of the Civil Service Law. And I could go on. These are just some of the issues that need to be addressed, and none of this is to suggest that a civilian review board is either a good idea or a bad idea. It is simply to point out that there remain many issues that need to be evaluated and clarified before moving forward with such a proposal. The council has a responsibility to provide for such evaluation and to consider all appropriate alternatives prior to acting in a legislative manner. This is why the resolution before you proposes the establishment of an independent advisory committee who will assist in conducting this review and report back to the City Council and the public. As set forth in the resolution, this committee will be established by the mayor on or before June 1st and will be provided with clear instructions in an appropriate time frame in which to perform their work. The council will then be in a better position to act on the proposed recommendation of a civilian review board. Again, this is not a rejection of the task force's recommendation. It's simply a recognition that further evaluation is required. And calling for further evaluation where same is needed does not mean that we are somehow not in compliance with the governor's executive order. We are all in pursuit of the same goal here, and I would be proud to compare what we've done with any other municipality, just as I would be proud to compare our police department, the men and women who serve in it, and the work that they do with any other department anywhere.
Thank you, Ben.